Good evening, everyone. We're just going to wait another minute or two. There are more people arriving, so let's just give them a moment and then we'll get going shortly. Thanks very much. Okay, I think we can get going. So I'd like to start by just saying good evening or good morning, depending where you are. I'd like to welcome you to the second technical session that we're having. You'll see I have Maurice Herlihy with me, and I'll introduce him in a moment. Just to mention, we had a previous session which Maurice presented, and that related to the DAG itself. So in GhostDAG, our chain is based off a directed acyclic graph, which is a DAG, and he presented the mechanics of how that works, the benefits of it, and how it differs from a traditional blockchain. So certainly, if you're interested in that, it is recorded. It's in our YouTube channel, so please go and have a look at that. It's certainly very interesting. It's very insightful, and Dr. Herlihy certainly presents very well in an easy to understand fashion. My name is Anthony Turner. I'm the founder and CEO of BlockDAG, so I'm very happy to have you all here. Thank you for your time. I'm not going to speak much. It's really Maurice and his time to present. What I would like to do is just introduce him. So Maurice has an AB in mathematics from Harvard University and a PhD in computer science from MIT. He served on the faculty of Carnegie Mellon University and the staff of DC Cambridge Research Labs. We are fortunate to have Maurice as our advisor, and he's an integral part of the team. He certainly keeps us on our toes, and we appreciate when he shares his insights in terms of how blockchain works, how the DAG works, and in this case, the topic that he's going to be presenting is on on EVM gas fees. I think we all know, we've heard about EVM gas fees, the nuances of how it works, why it's been built like that, how it relates to the smart contracts, etc. He'll take us through all of that. He'll also touch on MEV, which is a concept which can be to the detriment of users of blockchain. So he'll touch on that, what it means, the negatives of it, and the fact that GhostDAG and BlockDAG are looking at ways of preventing that. And he'll probably broaden that also to touch on the fees that we charge and how we do things differently. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Maurice and ask him to present to us. Thanks very much, Maurice. Maurice, you're muted.
There, I think I'm no longer muted. Good day, everyone. Today, I'm excited to talk about how gas and related fees work in BlockDAG. I want to emphasize that I'm not just here to tell you what the rules are, because you could look that up for yourselves in a very short amount of time. Instead, I want to explain why things are the way they are and how they got there, because I think there's an interesting story in the evolution of gas, how the notion was invented and how it turned out to have unintended consequences, and how attempts to fix those consequences have led to our modern gas structure. So for our roadmap, I'm going to start out by talking about the original gas structure, which was introduced by classic Ethereum. Very clever, very elegant scheme, which turned out, as I mentioned, to have some unintended consequences that had left loopholes that could be exploited to the detriment and frustration of clients. This was fixed, or mostly fixed, in in 2001 with the London hard fork. I'm going to tell you what was fixed and why they did that. And finally, what BlockDAG does differently. BlockDAG does, the gas structures are mostly the same as in Ethereum, but there are a couple of limited but I think significant changes that BlockDAG makes that I think will be of interest to everyone. So let's start out. What is gas? Well, gas is the idea that you're sending a transaction to a smart contract to execute. You're basically calling a program that runs on the blockchain. And the idea is that each computational step that you take costs something. It costs a certain amount of gas, maybe 5 or 10 gas units to add two numbers together. Writing a big array to long life storage might be hundreds of gas units. But every step you take in a computation, you pay for it, which is we don't think about it this way, but in the real world, this is also true. We pay electricity to power our laptops, but this is somewhat more direct on the blockchain. Now, the first reason gas is absolutely necessary is it makes denial of service attacks expensive. If anybody could run any computation for free on the blockchain, then some mischief maker would try to compute pi or do some other kind of wasteful computation, which would use up resources needed by more economically significant, more important transactions. So how does gas work? So when the caller calls the transaction, a caller sends a message to a smart contract saying, please do this for me. You prepay a certain amount of gas. So I will call a transaction and say, please add me to the database. And by the way, here's 500 gas units. I'm paying for 500 gas units. And that money is locked up at the time that I make the call. If my computation runs out of gas, if I don't provide enough gas, then that is viewed as cheating. That's a transgression. The EVM, the Ethereum Virtual Machine, or the BlockDAG Virtual Machine, will roll back your transaction as if it never, ever happened and take all your money. You get no refund. So it is highly prudent to make sure that you pay for gas, overpaying if necessary, to make sure that you don't lose all your work and your money. What if you don't burn up all your gas, as usually happens? Well, then any unused fees are refunded. So the sensible thing to do is, if I think that this computation should burn up, say, 200 gas units, then I should provide maybe 300 gas units. And if I make a mistake and it takes up more than 200, then I'm still safe within limits. The fact that you provide a fixed amount of gas gives you kind of a limit on your liability. So a runaway computation can't bust the bank if you don't give it enough money. Now, gas was invented when Ethereum was invented. Bitcoin doesn't really have the same kind of notion of gas. So I'm going to talk about what the original gas structure looked like, not because you need to know this to do business, but because if you understand how it worked and what was eventually changed, you'll go a long way toward understanding why things are the way that they are. Besides, I think it's a fascinating story. So been saying that you pay for gas, but I haven't said anything about the price of gas. Now, in classic Ethereum, you set your own gas price. So I can make a call and say, I'm willing to pay so many gigaway. So, I'm willing to pay 5 cents per gas unit. Or I can make a call and say, I'm willing to pay 10 cents per gas unit. It's all up to you. Now, the significance of this is that the miners who select which transactions get on the blockchain collect those gas payments. So if I submit a transaction with 5 cents per gas unit and you submit a transaction with 10 cents per gas unit, miners everywhere are going to prefer your transaction over mine because they make more. So this is a way of signaling which transactions are important. And of course, the way you signal that your transaction is more important is to pay more for it. So it's just like the real world. So a higher price means a higher priority. And this is important because we want the blockchain to be economically efficient. We want important things to have higher priority than unimportant things. Now, let's go over this in more detail. So the cast of characters in a blockchain, well, we'll start with the clients. The clients are the people who use the blockchain to get business done. That would be many of you in the audience, I assume. The other players are the miners. The miners are the gatekeepers for the blockchain. They decide whose transactions are included. The miner pulls a transaction out of the free-floating pool of transactions, and pick which ones should go in. Typically, of course, they will pick the ones with the highest gas fees. So why do we have fees in the first place? Well, because we're faced with a classical economic problem where we have demand coming from the clients who want to run transactions. Everybody has transactions that they want to fit onto the blockchain, but the blockchain is a limited resource. In the early days, maybe there's plenty of space for anyone, but if a blockchain becomes popular, then sooner or later, demand will exceed supply. And there will be more transactions sitting in the pool, in the mempool, than there is room in the next block. So the miners have to make decisions on who gets in. So there's not enough space for everyone. So, of course, we have to prioritize the low value versus the high value transactions. And the red client here has a super important transaction. An IPO has just taken place and they desperately want to buy this new stock before the price goes up. The blue client, perhaps they're paying overdue rent. So they think it's pretty important for their transaction to show up. It's not really important that it's, if it's a few minutes late, that nobody cares. And the pink client maybe is paying for a magazine subscription and doesn't really care if it's delivered slowly. So how do each of these clients figure out how much gas to pay, how much to offer? Well, there were lots and lots of gas price estimation services, which would sample the network, see what people are paying, and they would tell you, well, if you're high priority, you should offer this much, medium priority, that much. If you don't really care, but you want to make sure it gets eventually included, then pick something else. And normally, these estimation services work just fine. But when the chain becomes volatile, which happens more and more often as the chain becomes more popular, again, somebody issues an NFT or an IPO or a cute kitten game, then they become inaccurate and not terribly helpful. So economically, people who work on what's called game theory have studied these kinds of situations, and they call what's going on a blind auction. The idea is we're auctioning space on the blockchain. You get to make one bid, and you have no idea what anyone else is bidding. So here, the miner is saying, okay, I'm accepting bids for slots on the blockchain. The red client bids 100, and the others bid 50 and 25. So the miner says, okay, so I've got room for 150. I've got room for 2 transactions. So the red client gets in for 100, winning bid. The blue client, which is the next highest, gets in for 50. There's no more room, so the pink client, who only bid 25, is excluded. Now, a natural reaction for the red client is what we technically call regret. The red client realizes that they could have bid less and still gotten a slot on the blockchain. If only I knew now, if only I knew then what I know now, I would have done something different, is called regret. So a problem with this is that you might overbid in your ignorance of other people's bids. Rolling back the tape and rerunning it in an alternate universe, it could be the case that there's a new IPO going on, and blue and pink outbid red, who didn't suspect a thing. And now red does not get a slot on the next block, but the other two do. And this too leads to regret, because red said, well, if I had only known that they were bidding higher, I would have bid more, because it would have been worth it to me to pay that much. So this is a well-known problem with blind auctions, and in fact for many kinds of auctions, that there's an incentive to game your bid. You don't really want to reveal how much something is worth to you, because something may be worth a lot, secretly may be worth a lot to me, but I don't want to alert anyone else that this painting is actually a Caravaggio unknown to the other bidders. So people have developed an alternative approach called the uniform price auction. And here the idea is that the bidding goes on just as before, but everybody ends up paying the same price. So in this case, there's room for two transactions. Red gets in because red bid the most. Blue gets in because blue bid the second highest point price. Pink is excluded because they bid the lowest price. And we take the lowest winning bid, and that's what everyone pays. So even though red bid 100, he pays 50, and blue, who bid 50, pays 50. And of course, the pink doesn't pay anything at all. So this has the property that nobody ends up envying anyone else. Nobody gets a better deal than anyone else. And the nice thing about this, and this is something that people who do game theory can mathematically prove, is that the most sensible strategy here is to bid honestly. That there is nothing to gain about lying about how much something is worth to you. So if you think that painting really is a masterpiece, then you should bid $1 million. You presumably won't have to pay $1 million if no one else realizes it. But what happens is if the clearing price is less than your value, you pay the clearing price and you get what you want. So this should make you happy because you got good value for your money. You're excluded if the clearing price is more than what it's worth to you. That may be frustrating, but basically you weren't willing to pay what the market was willing to pay. But most importantly, there are no regrets. You cannot go back and say, now that I know something, I'd like to go back in time and do something different, because you wouldn't have done anything different when when all is said and done. So this makes life easier for everyone, because you don't need to scheme and game and wonder what the others are thinking. The strategy of being honest is the simplest thing, and it actually makes sense under these circumstances. Now, that said, that doesn't solve all our problems. There's a second way in which this kind of bidding can go wrong. And in fact, this is a well-known problem in real life bidding too. Consider the following situation. Here, there are space for 3 transactions. Red bids 100 and blue bids 100 because they really, really want that space. Pink doesn't really care and bets 25. But because there's space for 3, all 3 of them are included, and the clearing price is now $25 each. And the miner is really unhappy that despite the fact there's some clients who really value blockchain space, they end up paying only a quarter of what they think it's worth. So the miner naturally says, well, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to make a fake bid up for another 100. So basically, I'm paying myself. This is, I think the technical term is shilling. A shill is someone who bets in an auction who doesn't really intend to, who's not really interested in buying the object. Now, the effect of this bid is that the clearing price jumps to 100. The miner collects 100 from the red client, 100 from the blue client. It doesn't collect anything from the fake bidder because that's all the same pot of money. But the profit for the miner went from $75 to $200, which is more than double. So there's a strong temptation to make fake bids, even with the second price auction. What else would go wrong? Well, instead of impersonating a bidder, you can create an off-chain black market. This is also apparently a real problem in real art auctions, for example. The auctioneer goes off and gets a couple of friends and says, "Look, I'll, if you double your bid, I'll secretly refund you the extra money, and that will drive up the clearing price." So these are the problems that plagued the classical gas structure. These were problems that I think probably weren't foreseen at the time that the mechanism was put into place. So I'm not disrespecting the mechanism. I'm just saying that coming up with economic incentives for people who are very clever and have a lot of time and are highly motivated to find loopholes is difficult. So part two is how these problems were addressed in modern Ethereum. So in 2021, Ethereum launched the London hard fork, which was intended to alleviate some of these problems. So the goals for the London hard fork were to dampen short-term price volatility. The idea that you can easily buy a slot on the blockchain for a certain amount and then discover that you need 10 times that much because something exciting is happening on someplace else leads to, it makes life difficult because you can't predict things. It increases user aggravation. And the goal was to give a better user experience so that you could remain calm when you're using Ethereum. And in particular, you want fees to be more predictable. Fees can change. In fact, fees must change, but there's a bound on how quickly they can change so that you can predict in the short term how much you'll need. On non-goals, lowering fees was not a goal. So the volatility fixing the volatility is a goal, but making the chain less expensive was definitely not a goal. And that's because the cost of fees is an economics problem. It's a supply versus demand problem. And if the blockchain can't scale to increase demand, then that's not something that can be addressed by an economic mechanism. This is something that requires a better blockchain. So how do transaction fees work? Well, in Ethereum, there's now two parts. So forget all that business about setting your own gas price. That no longer holds. So there's a base fee that you pay that's fixed by the chain. And the next thing we'll talk about is how that base fee is fixed by the chain. And then there's the tip, fixed by the user. So pretty much the blockchain tells you what the base fee is. You tell the blockchain, you give the blockchain a tip. And you say, miners here's a tip for the miner. The larger the tip, the higher the priority of your transaction. So in some sense, we've decoupled the cost of gas from this incentive, choose me, that we had in the previous one. Now, there are a couple of attacks that we want to protect against. We want to make sure that miners have no incentive to create fake transactions. Now, we saw earlier that with the second price auction, that miners do have an incentive to create shills to drive up the clearing price. Similarly, we want to say that there's no incentive to create an off-chain black market. We want to avoid both of these things, partly because it makes the blockchain less economically efficient, but also we want the clients to be confident that they're not being cheated, that they're not losing out, that insiders aren't conspiring behind their backs to get a better deal. so that the only rational thing to do is to participate in a transparent way. So, whereas the pre-London fork, each block had a fixed gas limit. There was a fixed amount of gas that you could consume that could be consumed by the transactions in a block. In the post-London world, we're going to be flexible. The goal is to have 15 million gas units in every block. So if a miner creates a block, it has 15 million gas units pledged, then we're happy. Under stress, we're going to allow more gas. So if demand spikes, then we have some wiggle room, and there's a maximum of 30 million gas units. So normally we try to keep it at 15, but if we're stressed out, then we will grudgingly admit more gas up to a limit of 30. So here's how we compute the base fee. If the last block has less than the ideal, less than 15 million, then the base fee will go down by a maximum of 12.5%. That's 1/8. So, and I'll give you the exact formula in a minute. But if the blocks are not being filled, then of course we lower the price to make it more attractive. If the blocks are more than half full, that means that we're being stressed. We're coming under stress, and we want to slow down the rate at which transactions show up. So we're going to increase the base fee, but again, by a maximum of 12.5%. So this gives us the ability, or this gives the blockchain the ability to respond to changes in demand. So less demand, it becomes cheaper, more demand, it becomes more expensive, but it puts a kind of a limit on how much things can change. Things can't just leap through the roof immediately, which is of a great comfort to people who want to pay for things. So don't panic, but this is the formula. I'll explain it step by step. So this is the current fee is a function of the previous fee. This is the size of the previous block in gas. This is the target size, which is a constant, is 15 million. And so let's plug in the 15 million. So this is the formula that tells you how the base fee changes from one block to another block. If the previous block was half full, in other words, if things were in an ideal state where we had exactly the amount of gas that we wanted, then that term becomes zero, and the base fee is unchanged, which is what we want. You know, as long as we're kind of in equilibrium, there's no reason to change the base fee. Now suppose we go to the other extreme where the previous block was full. This means that we are under heavy strain. We have so much demand that we filled up not just the block, but even our kind of extra cushion wiggle room. Well, then we do the math. What happens is that the base fee goes up by 12.5%, by 1/8. So this is, it's good that it goes up because the supply and demand. It's good that it can only go up by 12.5% because that gives us predictability. Of course, if we continue to be under siege, then it's going to keep going up by 12.5%. On the other extreme, suppose that the previous block was empty, something that that doesn't happen, but in the limit. So if we plug that in there, then what happens is that term turns into a -1, and the base fee goes down by 12.5%. So you can see that this gives us a controlled growth and shrinkage in response to supply and demand. So the other half of the fees were tips. So remember, a tip is something that you add to the fee to get the attention of the miners. So if your transaction is super duper important, then you would be well advised to provide a large tip. If your transaction is medium important, then you can put in a reasonable tip. And if your transaction is not in any particular hurry, you probably want to put in some tip because otherwise you might be neglected forever, but it probably doesn't have to be very large. So we could say, well, we don't We could eliminate tips. You could say, well, this is everybody gets treated the same. But that would give miners a perverse incentive to just mine empty blocks. It's cheaper to mine an empty block than to do all the work of validating transactions and checking signatures and all of that. So that would create an incentive for miners to basically do nothing. They would collect block rewards when they mine the blocks, but would otherwise not make any money. We could calculate tips automatically. I could say, well, it's a flat 10% tip. In the United States, if you go to a restaurant with more than 6 people, then the restaurant will add an automatic tip. If you do that, though, then you lose the ability to identify high-value transactions. And it also opens up a kind of denial of service attack, where if I know that you're desperate to execute a transaction, I can flood the mempool with low-value transactions. We could burn the tips. That means we could use tips as a way of identifying important transactions, but then throw away the money. That would drive tipping off chain. That would create a black market where I would, send an encrypted text to someone I know is a miner and say, look, if you put my transaction on the chain, then I will wire you some money surreptitiously. And again, this is one of the scenarios that we very much want to avoid, because we do not want there to be any incentive to do deals off chain. Okay, so long story short, this works. This is a highly technical paper that sets up a mathematical model and proves that miners are incentivized to follow the rules, basically. They're disincentivized from including fake transactions. So this case where the miner was either making fake bids or bribing his friends to make fake bids, there's no incentive to do that. You'll make more money if you play honestly. And there's no incentive to make off-chain deals. You can't get a better deal off-chain than you can on-chain. So you may as well be honest and play by the rules. So in Ethereum, the base fee is burned. That's to make sure that there's no incentive to cheat in some sense. And the tip is paid directly to the miner. On BlockDAG, it's slightly different. The combination of base fee and tip are split. The miner gets 50%. 25% goes to the DApp. That is the agent who controls the smart contract that you're running. We do this because we think it's important for DApp makers to be incentivized to write and run high-quality dApps. So this is a way of taking the profits that would have gone elsewhere and using it to encourage the development of a rich ecosystem. And 25% of it goes to the BlockDAG Foundation, because that's basically the chain's only source of income. And somebody has to pay for bug fixes, upgrades, basically general maintenance. Now, one thing that BlockDAG does that is different in a more radical way from Ethereum is there are measures in place to fight what's called MEV. Now, never mind what MEV stands for, because it changes from time to time, but basically MEV is a way that some of the players can bend the rules to disfavor certain clients. One of the most common ways is something called a sandwich attack. I don't want to get into the details, but basically imagine that I'm a hedge fund. I want to buy 1 million shares of Apple. If you hear about this and you what's called front run, you put your transaction in front of my transaction, you buy the 1 million shares of Apple, turn around and sell it to me for a slightly higher price, you've gained a risk-free profit at my expense. And that's a bad thing because it's basically unfair. But even worse, this in order to front run someone, you need to provide a large tip, because you want to make absolutely sure your transaction shows up in front of your victim's transaction. This means that you're driving up the fees for everyone. So if I include my transactions with a larger tip, then you're going to have to escalate your tips to compete. And so even parties who have no actual connection with the attack suffer in terms of having to pay higher fees, and it creates kind of unfair market conditions. And again, we want clients to be confident that they're getting a fair, transparent deal. So BlockDAG puts in place several anti-MEV measures. One of them is that the transaction payloads, the useful information about transactions in the pool, are kept encrypted. So when a miner selects a transaction, it doesn't know what that transaction is doing. It knows what the tip is, because that's not encrypted, but importantly, the predator cannot identify prey. So if you're buying your 1 million shares of Apple, and I'm a predator and I'm looking through the transactions in the mempool, I can't tell which one is your transaction, and so I can't front run it. And this is there to relieve pressure on fees and fairness. And this is also, we believe, going to help stabilize prices and enhance the user experience. Okay, so that's all I have to say. I hope that I've not only explained to you what gas is, but why gas is the way it is, which I think is a fascinating story. And it's something that is probably going to continue to evolve as we gain more and more experience. But I do think it's an intriguing and fascinating story. So I'll be happy to entertain any questions.
So thanks very much, Dr. Herlihy. I think, very, very useful, very intuitive explanation. Certainly helps a lot to understand even why base fees, which conceptually you would think base fees remain fixed and the tips are the ones that change. Obviously, that's not the case. So very useful to understand that. One of the takeaways is that obviously in a perfect world, we'd have blockchains that are fast enough, where there's ample space, where there's no conflict to be able to take or to be able to process a number of transactions that come through. If that was the case, then there wouldn't be pressure to increase fees, or fees would remain or should remain low. And obviously, this is the goal of BlockDAG. It's the goal of any performant modern blockchain, and certainly that's our stated goal is to play in that space where performance is one of the key ingredients of our blockchain. I think from an MEV resistance perspective, it's certainly something that we believe is important. We see time and again people being manipulated in a big way by MEV resistance. What Maurice showed earlier was a $700,000 loss to a trader. But in a smaller sense, it affects everyone just by the nature of the fees that get pushed up as they perpetuate these sorts of attacks. So it does affect all of us, even though it might not be to the large extent that some other people might experience it. And then from a fee sharing perspective, again, it's something we're doing differently. We're not following everyone else. We believe that certainly the builders that build on top of us, that bring dApps that encourage their users and encourage use on the chain, they should be incentivized. So we share fees with them. And then BlockDAG itself, it's a form of revenue. So that's why the 25% fee split to ourselves. There have been questions, do we burn that? Do we not? It's a decision we haven't taken yet. It depends on the tokenomics and it might change over time. We're going to move into some Q&A now, but just before I do that, people often drop off during the Q&A. So before that, I just want to mention that we have an AMA scheduled for this Thursday, for the 20th, 7 p.m. UK time. And the topic there is, we'll start by giving an update on the beta testnet that is imminent. So that's due to come out on the 28th of March. So we'll give you an update on that. The other topics, which are a lot more, if you can call them hot topics, people have been waiting for feedback on the rewards for early investors. So I'll be discussing that. An update on the miners, also very, very topical. Further discussion around the tap miner, It's important to update everyone on that. There's a lot of earnest debate around the tap miner. I'll also be discussing the vesting schedule, and this is for the pre-sale, which is known already, so there's no change there. More importantly, the bonuses that have been delivered during the pre-sale, X1 rewards, and also the tap miner rewards. So discussing the vesting schedule and how we're approaching that for those different categories of tokens. So that's this Thursday, 7 p.m. UK time. Notice will go out on the usual channels. So that's all I needed to cover. Just again, thanks very much to Dr. Herlihy for his presentation. We're going to open up for questions now. Please keep it to topic. I know you've got lots of questions. Keep those to Thursday or any other forum, but right now, keep it to topic, which is around gas fees, transaction fees, MEV, anything relating to that, and how it relates to obviously BlockDAG. And again, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate having you here. I will also put up a poll in a moment with some subjects for other technical presentations, and you're all welcome to vote in terms of what interests you. So these technical presentations will become more frequent, and besides Dr. Herlihy, we hope to have other individuals also presenting as well. So without further ado, let me open up for questions. So questions are open. So Maurice, I'll just read the questions to you, and then that might be easier. So the first one is,
yes,
will quantum computing affect the gas fees, and if so, how?
So that's a good question. Quantum computing can affect lots of other aspects of the blockchain, anything involving encryption or hashing. The answer is, I don't immediately see why it would, but it might. Quantum computing right now is still in its infancy, and we don't quite know what it can and can't do, or what it will or won't be able to do. And the situation may change as it emerges. For now, I think gas pricing is probably insulated from the quantum, non-quantum question.
Okay. Another question, what makes the BDAG gas fees lower compared to Ethereum? I mean, just from my perspective, we've indicated the fees, but we haven't finalized them yet. Maurice, if you've got anything to add to that, but I think right now the intention is that we will be less than Ethereum. Certainly, when we launch, we'll have there won't be a lot of pressure on the gas fees. I mean, that's typical of any new chain. So we'll have the benefit of a new chain with lots of block space and obviously lower transactions. As the transactions pick up, that dynamic will change. The intention from our side is to make sure that our TPS and our performance outpaces the growth of the transactions, in which case we'll be able to keep the fees low.
One way to think about the mechanism that I described for dealing with extreme mismatch between supply and demand is a little bit like the airbag in your car. You hope that you never have to use it, but it's there if you ever have to. And in the same way, BlockDAG is built built to handle any reasonable demand without coming under stress. Nevertheless, we want to make sure that we have mechanisms in place so that if someday in the far future we do get unexpected spikes of demand, that we can do the right thing.
Okay. Another question, could you imagine like a gas fee free period? So just to restate that, this person's asking if we're envisaging a gas free period, and this is obviously at launch to attract people at the beginning of the project. Just from my side, we haven't we haven't anticipated that. It's something we can certainly consider, but it's not necessarily on our roadmap. The intention is our fees will be low enough. One of the challenges with having fees that are too low or zero, unless it's well managed in certain ways, is that you get a lot of spam, or you can get a lot of spam as well. So we need to be careful around that. Maurice, any ideas on that?
I would be worried about a denial of service attack if it were completely free. Everything on the internet is subject to predation from spammers and people like that. The test net is basically gas free, so you can run anything you want on any of our various test nets, and that's probably the place to exercise your smart contracts and dApps and so on before deploying on the real thing. But I think we need, it doesn't take much to deter spammers. Very low fees will deter spammers, sometimes surprisingly. But a zero fee does sound like asking for trouble.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Nick. One question about MEV, though. Couldn't bigger transactions be identified if the tips are not encrypted by looking at the biggest tips? Or how does that work?
You might be able to tell that somebody considers this transaction really important, but you still wouldn't be, you don't know who it is or what they're doing. Now, I suppose that, you might, if you have a spy who tells you that the hedge fund is about to buy Apple stock and you see a transaction with a huge tip, you might put two and two together. But that's not a terribly realistic situation. Most front runners are just mechanical bots that watch the stream of events and kind of automatically front run when they can. And these kinds of bots would be put out of business if the mempool were encrypted.
Okay. Question from Joe. Will the fees be as high as Bitcoin and Ethereum? If I can start by answering that. So our stated goal obviously is to be able to handle high transactions per second. Our test net is currently running around 1,000 transactions per second, and over time we'll be pushing that up. So we're in a different space to Ethereum and Bitcoin. I think we compete more closely with sort of layer 2s and with other more modern chains. So I think that's probably a more applicable comparison then.
What you said.
Good. There are some questions that aren't applicable. There's one, how big will the mining farms be allowed to go to? Again, not in topic. So I'm just going to move on from those. The questions around staking. I've indicated that is the intention pre-launch to include staking. A question from Joseph. What do we consider a big, medium, or small tip? Maurice, any guidance there?
I think it's probably premature to assign actual numbers. When the time comes, we'll know.
Patrick has a question. How will micropayments be handled by BDAG without the burden of gas fees greater than payment? I think that's a matter of setting it at the level that it still incentivizes or makes micropayments practical. I suppose the question also is, what's your definition of micropayments? If a transaction fee is 1 cent, that certainly won't preclude you from buying something for $1 or $5 or $10. So I think as long as the fees are kept low enough, we should encourage micropayments. Here's a left ball or right ball question for you, Maurice. Quantum Fusion will be a competitor for BlockDAG. They claim to have 10,000 TPS. I'm not sure if that's the name of a chain or whether that's a technology. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure what quantum fusion is, but I'm sure we'll give them a run for their money.
Okay. Another question, how are you different or better than or from Casper? So I think what I'd like to do is first acknowledge the work that Casper has done. I mean, they're a forerunner in the DAG space, and it's not just Casper. There are certainly a lot of or a few other blockchains that have pioneered the space, and we wouldn't be here without them. We've borrowed a lot from various papers, which include a lot of the work that's been put into Casper and the people behind Casper. So not going to take anything from them. If anything, there's a lot of respect for them. So the difference between us and Casper, the primary difference, well, there's a couple of differences. The first one is obviously they're ahead of us in terms of launching. So they've had time to mature their technology, mature their the algorithms. They've included some unique tweaks to the original GhostDAG algorithms. So they certainly have done very well in terms of the TPS. I think they can handle 10,000 TPS, which is really remarkable for a proof of work chain. So they've had that advantage, and obviously from our perspective, to catch up is a lot of work, a lot of effort, but that's certainly what we're targeting. The other thing is they are certainly at this stage they don't provide EVM compatibility. And that's certainly, I'd say it's almost something that we underestimated when we first started down this road, is the additional effort that's required to make sure that we can run proof of work fast in a DAG structure while also running smart contracts or EVM smart contracts. So that's certainly been an additional challenge. It's something we have to get past, and we're obviously putting a lot of effort into it. But it is an extra significant level of work that needs to be done. So certainly not easy, and it would be interesting to see if Casper does go the EVM route, which they have talked about, what the impact of that is on their scalability and transactions per second. So I think that gives you a flavor of where we are. We plan to compete with them head on. I mean, they are certainly our primary competitor. Everything we do is with a view on how can we match Casper, exceed them, but do it with EVM as well and WASM as well, which is an additional functionality that we'll be including down the line. There's a question from George, which is how many maximum theoretical transactions per second could BlockDAG achieve? It's a difficult question to answer because, for starters, theoretical means we're sitting in a lab with low latencies, etc. So how do we change that so it becomes more practical? Because there's a big difference between lab testing and real world testing. So that's the first thing. We're also continually making improvements to our code and our protocols. We're trying to get around, obviously, the EVM component that does slow things down. So there's a lot of work that's going into it. What I can say is our test net that's going out shortly, whatever that TPS might be, and we'll announce it close to the time. As I said, it's around 1,000. It might be slightly less. It might be slightly more, but let's say it's around 1,000. Certainly, the following testnet will be higher, and our launch TPS will be higher than that still. So that's the progression we're looking at. What we launch at, I can't say for now. We have certain things that we're targeting. I think we've stated previously that we're targeting to launch at 2,000 transactions per second, and we believe that that's more than doable based on where we are now. I think that covers most of the questions. Apologies if I've missed yours. There are quite a few here. Some have been answered, some are sort of slightly off topic, which I encourage then to rather ask those again during the AMA on Thursday. Okay, I think we can finish off. Actually, what I didn't do is pull up the survey, so let me do that now. So here are just some of the potential topics that Dr. Herlihy has suggested he can discuss. We also have other people who bring other topics which we may also include. So if you can give your feedback on which of these are more interesting, and we'll certainly use that to determine next technical sessions. I think we're going to leave it at that. So I'll leave the survey up. So take your time to answer that. But otherwise, again, thank you very much for participating, for being here. Thanks very much to Dr. Herlihy for presenting. As I said, we'll hopefully do more of these. I think everyone appreciates them. I certainly enjoy it because I have less speaking to do, and we'll intersperse these with other traditional AMAs in the coming weeks. Otherwise, again, thank you very much, everyone. Good evening, good morning, and good night.